No, just or another councillor. You don't need to write the chair of ITI. Right. Thank you, John. The next item is draft comments on the draft Ōtākaro Avon River Corridor Regeneration Plan. Thank you. This is a relatively technical submission. Yeah, I'll open it up for questions first. So, yeah, Dion.
Yeah, I was just wondering, when I was reading this through again, I was just wondering if this was an appropriate time to also make comment around the governance and ownership of the residential or the Avon Ōtākaro River Corridor.
In what regard?
So obviously that conversation needs to happen, but is there any scope for the council to sort of have
it? Regenerate Christchurch doesn't make a recommendation on that.
Yeah,
that isn't part of the...
So it's not the appropriate time to have that conversation? That's all I was asking.
The answer to your question is no, it is not.
And so
but it is an issue that does need to be determined, and you would have seen that I've made a few comments about it of late. Yeah. But ultimately, ultimately, it will be a decision that the city needs to make, I think. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's no point in even making
there's no point making the point here. Yeah.
I'm trying my luck everywhere I can.
That's all right. That's all right. So are there any other questions, Yanni?
Thank you. I was just interested in where it talks about the funding. So it says on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fifth bullet point on page 76, acknowledge the extent of funding required to deliver the plan has been considered and expressed well. I mean, I'm just still really concerned that this is like the blueprint 2.0, where, you know, there's no agreement in place for funding, there's no clarity about who's doing what, and all the things that people expect to happen just don't happen because there's years and years of wrangling over who pays or who does. So I was just interested why you've included that fifth bullet point, and then I think, you know, that you go on to talk about the lack of clarity and potential difficulties for implementation of some parts of the proposed district plan provisions further on. So yeah, it just seemed to me a little bit contrary. So I just would welcome any sort of response to those concerns.
Yes, I think the in regards to that, the bullet point about the funding, that was in respect of our earlier submission as a Section 29 partner, where we had outlined the concern that there wasn't an acknowledgement of what we thought was appropriate funding required. So they have addressed that now in the front end of the plan, and acknowledging the conversation to occur as to governance, funding, and ownership outside of the plan, so that they can't resolve that through this. But obviously the district, there's a district plan package obviously as part of this, and we still have some concerns about how this would be implemented, which may not require funding. It obviously will for things to occur, but it's our implementation as a council. We will have significant control, I suppose, or sort of powers, or, you know, concerns. So we need to make sure that we've got that right. At the moment in this, we want to make sure that we've got the best package that we possibly can from Regenerate Christchurch in this plan. So acknowledging that we think that they've addressed some of their concerns we had in the Section 29 submission that we made earlier, and that we still have concerns about the district plan package as some of the provisions that they've put forward.
So how do we get over the issue, like we've seen with the blueprint, you know, the constant delays, the constant uncertainty, the constant lack of clarity? Have we got any sort of time frame for resolving who does what
It
and
says it's a 30-year horizon. It says 3 LTPs. That's what we're saying. It's an intergenerational plan.
I get that, but if there's no process to work out who does what and who pays for what, then it seems like the risk is that it goes on for years.
Yeah. Well, that conversation is outside of this.
Yeah, I think it's outside of the scope of you know, the staff's
on the regeneration plan. So that's to come.
So I've got a couple of in order questions, which are in relation to the reference in the draft submission to the Section 71 high flood management area. That's now been accepted, so I think that part of the submission can now be just reinforced, and so that it's written into the submission with a note that it has been accepted by the Minister. I don't think she's going to turn it down for this part. And the second one, which I was quite interested in, is the question of the landings and the sort of technical point that you make about the inanga breeding areas.
Yes.
And I almost asked myself, given that they're very specific to different parts of the river, why would they be the landings? You know, I mean, wouldn't you choose the landings areas to be away? And so I understand that you're looking for a regulatory response, but was there nowhere else on the river that could have been more appropriately targeted for the particular landings? I think there was one that was completely within the area and one that was partially in the area.
I wasn't involved in the selection of the landings, but I think what the overall intention was to provide for landings to be spaced more or less evenly along the river to provide that access. And obviously also in places where there was road access and other forms of access would be possible. So they tried to, I think, pick the locations that achieved those sorts of goals, those objectives. I think, well, the impression I get is they didn't really look at that aspect in the sort of detail that we're now asking them to look at it. And it's an ongoing discussion. There's a meeting going to happen tomorrow between our ecologist and their ecologist to try and work out if there is a solution other than a requirement for a restricted discretionary activity.
Yeah.
And that in itself is an important point anyway. I mean, all we're really talking about is, should it be a controlled activity resource consent, or should it be a restricted discretionary resource consent? So both options are going to require resource consent. It's just we're saying that in terms of those two landings, the council needs the ability to be able to say, no, that development of that landing is inappropriate.
But if they moved those two landings, then it wouldn't be the problem. So I just, you know, that's the way I'm looking at it, is the only solution a regulatory solution around resource consent, and whether you can control it or restricted discretionary.
I suspect that's where the conversation tomorrow is going to head.
Right. But that is an option.
Yeah, but there are sort of other considerations that they factored in terms of selecting those locations. So I think there'll be a bit of... Yeah,
but I think people would want certainty too. So for me, it just seemed to me that considering an alternative place for the landing might actually give certainty, especially if you could then, because you don't have a problem with the controlled activity on any of the other landing sites. Is that right?
Well, it will still be a controlled activity on all landings.
Yeah.
At least controlled activity. All we're really asking now is that for the two landings that are adjacent to the inanga spawning grounds, that they need to be restricted discretionary activities.
Yeah, but controlled means that there's a good deal more certainty around
Yes, they
controlled
will be
and
granted,
restricted.
yes.
So what I'm saying is that an option, is that you talk to them about actually relocating those ones?
Yes, yes. I think they're very conscious of that is a potential option.
Yeah. And so this becomes the fallback position?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Tim?
Thank you. And that kind of long-winded answer, which is great, has really raised, because I did have the same question and a number of questions about this, because number one question is, if I vote yes to this, is this closing the door to future discussions with regards to movement on this plan?
No, because
This is a submission, so that process still needs to go out, and we'll continue to work with them.
Because, I mean, here we are in 2018, and we have a plan which is really nicely, these landings are really nicely spaced and they're very convenient, but the one thing they're not doing is totally not working with nature. So we're now going to have to go through a costly planning process to make sure that they can fit into the environment of the spawning areas. Whereas if we are truly working with nature, perhaps a better idea would be to skip and move around these areas. And gosh, it might be a bit inconvenient for people to walk a bit further in a beautiful place which we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars setting up, and the cost and operations cost of running them all for the next 100 years or however long it's going to be. But isn't that the whole principle of what we're trying to achieve with this Avon River corridor?
yes, yes, and I think if you think of one of the priority objectives is ecological enhancement, the last thing we want to be doing is raising a risk that we're actually going to reduce habitat for an indigenous species.
So however you juggle this, I see that being one of the key things here, and that's what we... the other two things...
So could we call that out in the actual submission? I know it has to be in today, but...
Yeah, that's
Yes, it is. It's in both in terms of the attachment B district plan amendments, and it's included in the bullet points at the front end of the submission.
That to move them?
Oh, sorry, to move them.
No, that's
the
what I
issue,
mean.
The issue.
So
right, yes, definitely.
We can make that, yes we can make that clearer. In the
yeah,
submission.
I think that when you get to the... it is noted that not all the suggested district plan amendments sought by the council been incorporated into the current draft plan proposed district plan provisions. This included the request that the development of the landings and walkings, biking paths which impact on protected natural features do not comply with normal waterway setback requirements should require resource consent that can be declined.
Yes.
That our primary focus actually is that they be moved so that they don't interfere with those protected natural features. That's our first option. So this is very much a fallback provision. I would really want us to state here that we should be avoiding developing those in those areas. That they're relatively distinct areas along the river, so it's not much of an ask, as Tim said, to do this. Yeah.
Sorry. Second question is, for those groups that perhaps feel that they haven't been heard or would like to be heard again with regards to their ideas for the area, and I'm speaking specifically about the flat water group, is there going to be an opportunity for them to have another airing or another crack at it, if you like? Or is this nothing to do with that?
Well, this isn't to do with that particular matter, and they can...
they will be making submission like we are.
If they choose to, through the same process. So,
yeah.
And I'm sure they will.
I mean, submissions closed today, and people know that, and they are out there encouraging people to make submissions around particular...
Exactly.
As all groups are.
As all groups are, and we're one of those.
So going back to my first question, is if we are voting, say, yes to this, we are endorsing Regenerate's full plan with regards to their Avon River corridor plan.
No,
with regards to the landings?
no. What we're doing is endorsing the essentially the outcomes improving water quality, managing natural hazards, restoring ecosystems and connecting people with nature. They're no longer included as priorities. They're reflecting that, yeah. So, and we're asking that greater clarity be achieved by making these more clearly identified in Chapter 1 to support and be consistent with them placed on them in the green print. Unfortunate phrase.
Approves the draft comments to regenerate Christchurch on the draft Ōtākaro Avon River Corridor Regeneration Plan. So, but that's the regeneration plan, and it's that we are endorsing.
The submission.
Yeah. Yeah. Yanni.
I just kind of want to understand. So there's a whole discussion about the first stage. There's a number of projects that are listed. There's the page 63, a list of things that are going to happen.
63 on our page.
On the draft plan, development and implementation plan.
So it's a separate document.
I'm still trying to understand if there's a kind of key date, like through the start of this process, it's been quite good in terms of not all the dates have been met, but you've actually been able to see a flow chart of we're doing this is where we want to get to, here's the kind of key time frames and who's making decisions. What I can't seem to comprehend from this document is once it's approved, then what's the time frame for those things to be done? So I don't know whether that sits with us as a council, that we need to come up with dates to talk to government, but I would have thought having clear timeframes for things like the implementation plan, agreeing on land ownership, finalising governance would be quite useful for the community so that they could see what happens next. Is that appropriate for our submission?
We've already said that that's not a point for questioning for staff.
Well, could we put that in our submission then?
What? That was the very first question that Dion asked.
But it's still no clarity in our submission.
It is actually mentioned in the submission already, as you know, because it came from the two community boards who'd asked to be engaged in that decision making. That decision's not being made now. It's not being made as part of this process.
I understand that. I'm not asking for the decision to be made as part of this process. I'm just asking if the plan should actually have a time frame around those decisions being made.
But no, because that's not their decision. It's not Regenerate Christchurch's decision. It is a decision that will be made in the fullness of time, with the contribution of both the Crown and the Council in terms of conversations that they'll be having, and also, in my view, the wider community, because the wider community needs to be involved in what is going to be a significant governance option. So it's not for this moment. Are there any other questions for staff? So have we got a mover and a seconder for the approving? Dion, seconded by Glenn. Any discussion? David?
Look, I'm not going to support this motion, principally because I see a lot of concern from residents in my ward and the aquatic community in Christchurch that a late catering for a number of sports has been dismissed, and we believe somewhat controversially. They would say that there's been an apparent dismissal of what we want in favour of what appears to be manipulated outcomes. Initially I was really enthused with the opportunities that Regenerate could advance, but sadly I'm disappointed in the outcomes after around about 11 million has been spent on surveys, consultation that many in the community see and across the city see as skewed information to support desired outcomes. The lake went from a pre-feasibility analysis to rejection with nothing in between. In the opinion of many that I've spoken with, the questions were weighted and skewed to achieve the outcome that Regeneration Christchurch wanted for the options put forward. There was no provision to vote on the lake, and subsequently a petition has now been raised which to date has somewhere close to 15,000 signatures. There is an incredible opportunity to create a world-class facility with huge economic benefit to the city. In my opinion, environmental outcomes can still be achieved, and alternative proposals appear to be continually dismissed without due consideration. The Regeneration plan talks about $2.9 billion of economic benefit, and I'd really like to see how those figures are supported. It's pretty light there. However, having said that, I do support the notion of a green spine wholeheartedly, but I believe we are missing an incredible opportunity to develop something outstanding for the city. And just to finish, the notion in my part of the world is that it appears the environmental evangelists have already determined what is best for us. I believe there is an opportunity for environmental outcomes and recreational outcomes with huge economic benefit to be achieved, and I don't see that sort of messaging coming through in the current Regeneration plan, so I won't support the motion.
Thank you. Yanni?
You know, I think there's been a huge amount of work go into this plan, and it's taken a long time. My biggest concern is that we're very good at coming up with pretty pictures and selling these big visions, but actually the implementation and delivering the things that people see in these plans just doesn't happen. You know, we've already had the blueprint where we were supposed to have a green corridor along St Asaph and Chewham Street, and you know that never happened. The south frame, for example, even the eastern frame, you know, was supposed to be a green spine, didn't happen, or happened in a lot less than what people saw on the plan. So I think one of the really, you know, the thing that's missing from this document is timeframes and clarity around the things that are going to be done. It's actually good. It refers to a number of those things: develop a transport plan, amalgamate land titles, clear infrastructure, remediate contaminated land, establish the living laboratory partnership as some of the things that are listed, but there's no timeframes and there's no commitment to funding. In our submission, what concerns me is we talk about the draft plan also appropriately recognises that it is unable to be resolute on public sector commitments, given the significant future decisions on funding and governance arrangements are still to be made, principally through the global settlement with the Crown. It is important that the community are made aware of these significant decisions, and we say it's pleasing to see that this is now mentioned at the front of the draft plan and reiterated in places throughout the document. But the key thing that's missing there is it's not just simply, I believe, about informing people and making them aware of significant decisions. It's actually allowing people to have a say and be involved and engaged in those funding decisions and that prioritisation. So, you know, there wasn't any public engagement or consultation on the secret cost share that the council did following the blueprint. There was no public consultation on the 300 million. And in this plan, it's really hard to see how the public can have a say around the priorities. So I personally would have liked our submission to be much more clear about the public having a say in terms of the funding and clear mechanisms in place that enable people to see a time frame for the things that are said that's going to happen actually being done. And I can't see why we wouldn't strengthen our submission to include that.
Glenn?
Thank you. One of the underlying assumptions in this plan is the greatest, recognising the greatest global challenge of our time, which is climate change and the threat to communities right around the world, including our own. I'm quite excited about some of the proposals here. I think there are all sorts of opportunities for us as a city and for local communities to participate in the unrolling of this plan over time. For instance, in the living laboratory section, there is an opportunity to recognise the carbon that is sequestered by the area already. Perhaps we could structure up something, some kind of entity to trade in carbon credits, to take, as recognition of the seriousness with which we take the threat of climate change. Perhaps the OPEX could go some way towards, or the income could go some way towards meeting the OPEX in the whole area. Local and city groups could take part in tree planting programs. Funding from trees could be sourced through the government's trees program. But that's not all. There are many other opportunities through this. Community consultation has been, I think, excellent. I think of the Burwood, Avondale, Dallington group meeting here in the council and then going down to the exhibition, coming back and then feeding back their own thoughts on the whole area. As communities living around that area, they were very impressed and can't wait for the projects to begin. The Green Spine in particular, I think, is quite exciting, linking the city to the coast. It's not only the Avon Ōtākaro cycleway that is involved, but the southern cycleway, which is projected to bring 35,000 visitors a year, and we recently signed the MOU on that. I think that's particularly exciting for Christchurch as well as the whole South Island. A question for me is, how complicated does it have to be? There are complexities, as we know, in the plan. I think at Bottle Lake, if you go out there, you'll see people running, walking, cycling, riding horses, walking the dog. For me, as this plan develops over time, I think that will be the recovery over time for the people of the East and the city after the events that have come our way. People love free, uninhibited access to the environment, and I'm convinced of that physical mental health link, and so I urge you all to support this plan, and I think it's important not only for the people of the East but for the whole city that we get this underway. There is money on budget. We can make a start.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Look, I love the concept and the idea of the green spine. I think it's an outstanding vision, and if it gets to where the vision wants it to go, then that will be a game changer for the city. But in saying that, we are struggling with supporting the reserves and parks and the special areas, the amenity areas that we have on the Banks Peninsula, the Port Hills between Godley Head and Gebbies Pass. We now have a million users in that, and we are struggling to maintain that. We are going to add, and we're going to add, and we're going to add, which is wonderful, but as a city, we are struggling. We need a conversation with regards to this green spine. Could it in fact be a national park, the first in a central city in New Zealand, or something along those lines? The 2018, and we had people putting designs of putting landings, etc., and what is recognised and known as some of the most sensitive areas in the Avon River. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. And then we start talking about the process of RMA and getting permissions, that costly and long process to get that there. The principle is we should be dodging them, that we should be working around them, shouldn't even be starting this conversation, and yet we are. When Regeneration started the conversation with Victoria Square and where we ended up, the principle of where they started, they didn't understand the site, and they should have been consulting and talking earlier on. So I do have some issues. The flat water is another one. I'm really I love the vision. I love what it is. I think it's absolutely amazing, but I really am struggling, to be quite honest, to say yes to this. Thank you.
Yeah. Aaron?
Yeah, I support some of the concerns that my fellow councillors have, especially Councillor East, around the flat water facility, because we were shown a plan at one point which made the water in the river cleaner by having that facility, not worse. So I'm struggling with some of the information that's been coming out over the last couple of years around what should happen with the site. It's a massive piece of land through our city. I personally don't want our city to own it. I think it should be a national park, and in fact it would be one of the world's most inner city national parks. Nairobi has one which is 7 kilometres from the inner city, so that would make ours closer. I'm not suggesting we put lions in the inner city like Nairobi, but we could certainly have it full of native bush. It becomes a carbon sink, like Glenn said, and I think that would be an incredible attraction, and that adds to the green spine. So, but developing any parts of it in any particular way could be detrimental to that particular national park that could flow through our city, and also it would still be able to potentially host that flat water facility. I don't think that should be written off. A lot of people would use it, and it would have environmental, cultural and economic benefits to the city and to the waterway and to the east of the city. So I am still struggling with this concept all these years later. And I think, you know, I know it's a river, so it's a water, but it becomes a water noose to the city if we end up as the ratepayers paying all the bills and picking up the tab. It was the government's decision to red zone this, not the city's, and it should be the government's job to turn it into whatever they're going to turn it into, not really ours, because it's not a partnership, really. I mean, like, well, I know we're meant to say it is, but Merry Christmas.
Anyone else? I'll let Dion close off the debate, but before I do, I'll just make a couple of comments. I guess for me, as a former resident in one of the areas that was red zoned by the said government, I've been looking forward to seeing a plan for the future. I know that it was never going to be delivered in my lifetime, because it is an intergenerational plan that we need for such a vast area. And I believe that transitional use can lead to permanent use. Transitional use could be many, many years. And I'm looking forward to some of the opportunities that I see being promoted at the moment that will enable Christchurch to claim for itself the status as the living laboratory of the world as we prepare for what is an uncertain future. I think we've got an enormous opportunity to raise public awareness of a number of issues and to hold debates and challenge each other to think about what the future holds and what it means to truly be resilient in the face of some of those challenges. So I'm really quite excited about this, but I don't think people should mistake what the role of the City Council is at this point in what is an ongoing process. We've been asked, like every other community group that has advocated for any particular use of this precious piece of land, we've been asked to supply draft comments on the proposed regeneration plan, which will go to the Minister for sign-off. And so our function here today is to provide that input on behalf of the city from the perspective of the issues that the council, as a city council, has a resolution about and an involvement with. In terms of that bigger debate about who owns, I think the bigger issue is who governs and what support they can raise, not just from the public sector and not just from the ratepayer, but from the private sector as well, and what can it provide by way of opportunities for those that want to advance social enterprise, environmental enhancements, all of those things that, as we know, come best directly from the community themselves. So I'm certainly supporting this series of comments on the draft Ōtākaro Avon River Corridor Regeneration Plan. Dion.
For me, one of the biggest things that when I look at this draft regeneration plan for this area, is there's two things. There's the people who used to live there. So this is where people used to live. This is where families were brought up, and this is where there's a lot of emotional sort of connection to. So a lot of effort has gone in to get to this point, and I do take my hat off to the amount of work that Regenerate Christchurch have done. It's not been easy, and there's still a lot of other issues around what people want in different locations to get through. But this is not what we're talking about today. This is really what we're looking at is the technical stuff, which is quite difficult. But the other point that I was wanting to say is the garden city of Christchurch. Now, Christchurch, the garden city, for me, doesn't necessarily mean flowers, doesn't necessarily mean a garden in somebody's front yard. It means that, but more in our 21st century, and as we start tackling this climate change issue. How do we live in a garden city and be adaptive? And I think actually this is what this provides and will provide in the future. And this is probably the best opportunity any city in the entire world has right now to tackle this climate change tsunami that's probably going to come. This has so much opportunity for the people of our city to engage in their local area, to be connected to the place that they want to be. We're talking about a mental health problem in our city that's, you know, coming towards us at an unprecedented rate. This area, with the connection that you could have with the land and actually people, could actually create such an interesting and engaging place, because we can see it already with the transitional use. People in this area are connecting where they never connected before, and I've seen it in the areas that I represent. You know, there's new people meeting all the time, and that's such an exciting you know, thing that I look forward to, and it probably won't even happen in my lifetime. This place won't be developed, and I've got a long time to sort of still keep working, but you know, I don't even think this will be finished in my lifetime, which brings me to the point which the next stage of this is what's going to be really important to me. Who governs this? And I really hope that the community have a very strong input into that conversation, because I want the community to be part of the governing of this place, of this zone, because it's where people used to live, and there's so much history and so much opportunity there. But in that, we need to also think about what we can do now, what can be done in the next 4 to 5 years, and then what can be done in the long term. But we need some things to actually grasp onto in the near future and in the and whatnot. The technical stuff, I just wanted to finish off on the priorities that were consulted on, and I'm really pleased that it was in our submission around the 4 priorities of the draft, and I just wanted to finish that. Improving water quality, managing natural hazards, restoring ecosystem, and connecting people with nature. I'm pleased to see that comment in our submission, because I think that does underpin everything that I said. So I hope everybody supports this for the future.
Very good. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. So just put your hand up for no. East, Gough, Kewen, Scandrip. Thank you. I think we should